Hi everyone, I'm Alex. Today we'll examine a case that, at first glance, looks like the neat outline of an American dream. A comfortable home, military service, and a family. But under that surface were fractures that would lead to something far darker. This is the story of Jennifer Gladhill and Matthew Johnson, a marriage that unraveled in private and ended in homicide in late September of 2024. From the outside, it's easy to describe them in a few tidy phrases. They lived in an upscale neighborhood of Cottonwood Heights, Utah, in a house appraised at roughly $1 million. Matthew, 51, served for years as a Green Beret in the Utah National Guard's 19th Special Forces Group. He had a reputation for competence and steadiness among his peers. Jennifer, 42, was the mother of their 3 children, an image of a supportive military spouse and an involved parent. But as so often happens in these tragedies, appearances are deceptive. The documents, messages, and later confessions sketch a different portrait. A marriage in decline, bitter exchanges that moved from drama to danger, and a sequence of decisions that culminated in a carefully planned killing. Over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to lay out, as methodically as the public record allows, how those decisions unfolded and how the legal system's response intersected with the private choices that followed. The unraveling begins. In the months leading to September 2024, the Johnson-Gladhill relationship degraded. Friends and neighbors who later spoke to investigators recalled raised voices, curt social interactions, and a sense that something between the two had changed. Private communications corroborate that perception. Text messages show prolonged arguments, bitterness, and references to separation. By July, divorce had entered the conversation as a potential outcome. In August, Jennifer filed for a temporary protective order, asserting she needed the court's protection from her husband. She submitted videos and messages as supporting evidence. Those materials, when reviewed, did not clearly show Jennifer as a frightened victim. Instead, the footage and text exchanges depicted confrontation, heated, reciprocal, and at times inflammatory. The court's evaluative role in this moment was critical. 3rd District Commissioner Russell Minus examined the materials and issued a ruling that dismissed the protective order. His reasoning is recorded in court documents. The videos did not show Jennifer as fearful. The messages could be read as intentionally provocative, and overall, the behavior of both parties suggested mutual dysfunction rather than clear unilateral abuse. He wrote that the parties' conduct was representative of a highly dysfunctional marriage and suggested divorce might have been the more appropriate remedy. It is important to be precise here. The commissioner did not absolve anyone of culpability or predict future criminality. He made a judgment about the legal standard for protective relief on the evidence before him. But for events that followed, that decision would register as a turning point. Matthew, believing the legal system had not offered the protection Jennifer sought, or perhaps recognizing irreconcilable rifts, began displaying different habits. Friends say he slept occasionally at his National Guard facility, citing unease at home. He told colleagues that he felt stuck and needed a way out. A parallel life. Parallel to the collapse of their marriage, Jennifer began an extramarital relationship. The affair, according to later testimony and messages, was not casual. It was an emotionally charged involvement that occupied much of her attention and became a focal point of her complaints about her marriage. The identity of the other man would later be central to the investigation, because he became both a witness and the person who provided the key admission that led to Jennifer's arrest. On September 19, 2024, Jennifer showed that man a handgun, a Glock 19X she kept in the home. In the context of a military household, this may have looked ordinary to an outsider, but prosecutors later emphasized it as a material fact. She had the firearm accessible and had shown it to someone outside the marriage. Other evidence shows she had arranged for their 3 children, ages 11, 7, and 5, to stay with her parents the weekend of September 20th. The logs and messages suggest this was planned in advance. In the days before the homicide, Matthew had become aware of aspects of Jennifer's behavior that worried him. Witnesses later said he seemed more withdrawn, sleeping away from home and telling a close friend that he wanted to move forward with divorce. The night everything changed. On the evening of September 20th, there was an argument in the Johnson Gladhill home. Neighbors reported sounds consistent with a heated exchange. According to Jennifer's later statement to police, Matthew confronted her after discovering the affair. That confrontation, she said, escalated into an intense verbal battle. In the early morning hours of September 21, 2024, the sequence of events shifted from domestic dispute into mortal violence. What follows is based on Jennifer's confession and the subsequent forensic and circumstantial evidence that investigators assembled. While Matthew slept in the master bedroom, Jennifer used his own 9mm handgun to shoot him in the head. The coroner's report later would list the cause of death consistent with a single, fatal gunshot wound. After the shooting, the actions taken were calculated and sequential. Jennifer wrapped Matthew's body in plastic, placed it inside a rooftop storage container, and moved the container down the exterior stairs of the house. She loaded the container into a family minivan. She smashed Matthew's phone. She drove his truck and abandoned it in a nearby neighborhood to create distance and confusion about his whereabouts. Then she drove north, away from Cottonwood Heights, and buried the body in a shallow grave at a location she later confessed to. That burial site has not been publicly disclosed. When she returned home, she undertook an extensive cleanup operation. Investigators would later testify about strong chemical odors consistent with bleach and enzymatic cleaners. Jennifer ordered and received a replacement mattress within 48 hours. Neighbors later described the household as unusually active in the cleanup period. The crucial confession. A crucial mistake changed everything. Jennifer confided in the man she had been seeing. The conversation included a full admission, according to recordings and statements later entered into evidence, of the killing, the disposal, and the cleanup. The lover recorded their next phone call, and the recording became a central piece of evidence in the prosecution. He had also witnessed visible marks on Jennifer and accepted her explanation about them being injuries sustained during the burial and cleanup. But once he had the recording on tape, he became frightened. Rather than immediately reported, he took his own steps. He preserved the recording and then ultimately provided it to law enforcement. The recorded statements are unpleasant to hear in their candor. In one segment, when confronted with the reality of what she had described, Jennifer's tone conveyed a mix of defiance and resignation. The recorded admission removed the courtroom's earlier ambiguity and provided prosecutors with a direct narrative from the person who knew the most.
Shortly after law enforcement obtained the recording and corroborating evidence, including the abandonment of Matthew's truck, the disruption in home routine, and the bleach odors, a warrant was obtained. Jennifer was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and related offenses. During interrogation, she provided further details that fleshed out the sequence investigators already suspected. Her statements admitted the elements of planning, moving the children, securing the weapon, and creating a narrative of disappearance by leaving the truck elsewhere. Evidence and forensic threads. In court, the prosecution's case was structured around several pillars: Jennifer's recorded confession to her lover, her subsequent admissions to investigators, the physical evidence of a staged scene and cleanup, and circumstantial evidence showing a motive, the affair, and a desire to remove Matthew from perceived obstacles to her new life. Forensic teams cataloged chemical residues and signs of cleaning consistent with attempts to remove blood or other biological traces. The smashed phone was recovered in pieces. Investigators reconstructed data as possible, but much of Matthew's recent communications were erased. The minivan and other items were subjected to trace analysis. Investigators also relied on witness statements: the longtime friend who Matthew had confided in about sleeping at the National Guard facility, neighbors who heard disturbances, and the man who came forward with the recorded confession. Defense counsel argued that the evidence was inconsistent and that the protective order dismissal had correctly noted the mutual dysfunction of the marriage. They emphasized, as the earlier commissioner had, that the relationship was unstable and emotionally charged. The defense also pointed to the lack of direct eyewitnesses to the killing and attempted to cast doubt on the chronology and whether the lovers' recordings might be incomplete or taken out of context. Prosecutors countered by pointing to the totality of the evidence. The tape provided a voluntary, contemporaneous narrative, the forensic findings supported a staged cleanup, and Jennifer's own statements to investigators filled in gaps. The prosecution's portrayal was straightforward and stark. This was a planned killing that combined emotional motive with methodical action. The psychological picture. Beyond the forensics and legal maneuvers lies the messy human psychology sitting at the center of the case. What leads a person from marital dissatisfaction to a decision to kill a spouse? Investigators and psychologists would later debate the interplay of motives here. Jealousy and betrayal were clearly present: Jennifer's affair, Matthew's discovery, and the increasing volatility in their interactions. But motive becomes persuasive in court only when supported by evidence indicating intent and planning. Jennifer's actions post-homicide suggested an effort to control narrative and consequence. She arranged for the children to be absent. She used the victim's weapon. She attempted to remove and conceal the body, and she sought to erase digital traces. Those choices point to a level of calculation inconsistent with an impulsive act of rage. Yet the recorded confession, in which she spoke plainly about her choices, also revealed a mind that vacillated between remorse and justification. She described feeling trapped and powerless in the marriage, and in her narration, she sometimes cast Matthew as a problem to be removed. This duality, a person who simultaneously presents as a caring mother and a calculating actor, is an uncomfortable hallmark of many domestic homicides. It forces a community to reckon with how well any of us truly know those closest to us. The children and the community. The three children, 11, 7, and 5, became collateral victims in the most literal sense. Removed from the scene before the event, they returned to a fractured household and a life altered indefinitely. Family members and child protective services later coordinated to ensure their safety. In closed hearings, the court considered guardianship and the psychological welfare of the children who had lost a father and who were the dependents of the person accused of his death. Neighbors described a ripple effect through the community. Families who had once waved and shared barbecues now speculated, worried, or simply kept distance. The National Guard unit Matthew had served with held a private memorial and openly mourned the loss of a comrade. Friends who had once trusted both spouses now felt betrayed and confused by the sequence of events. The trial and sentencing. The case proceeded through the criminal justice system with a high degree of public scrutiny. The prosecution presented their narrative, a pattern of deception, a deliberate killing, and carefully executed steps to conceal the crime. The defense maintained arguments of reasonable doubt around intent and disputed some forensic interpretations. Ultimately, Jennifer was convicted on charges related to the murder of Matthew. The jury, after weighing the recording, forensic evidence, and admissions, concluded beyond a reasonable doubt that the killing was not an accidental act, but a planned homicide. Sentencing reflected the severity of the offense and considered aggravating factors such as the attempt to conceal the crime and the premeditation inferred by the state. Those legal outcomes, however, do not resolve the deeper questions. Why did this family, outwardly so stable, break so violently? Who, if anyone, could have intervened? And what lessons should law enforcement and courts draw from an earlier dismissal of protective relief that in hindsight proved to be part of a longer chronology of mutual dysfunction and escalating danger? What we can learn. There are practical lessons in this tragedy. One is the difficulty courts face in assessing danger. Protective orders require a high evidentiary threshold, and what appears as provocation in a video can mask underlying fear and genuine threat. The legal system's tools are blunt instruments, and when human behavior is messy, decisions will sometimes fail to prevent future harm. Another lesson is the role of third-party witnesses. In this case, it was not a police officer or a neighbor, but a lover who recorded a confession. A single human being who made a difficult choice to preserve evidence and hand it over. Without that recording, the case would have been more reliant on circumstantial threads and forensic reconstruction, and a conviction might have been harder to secure. Finally, the case underscores the quiet vulnerability of families living within seemingly normal parameters. Military service, economic stability, and neighborhood respectability do not immunize couples from jealousy, manipulation, or escalation. Domestic violence, when present, can hide behind mutual accusations and complicated interpersonal dynamics. Closing reflections. When we look at the Johnson-Gladhill case in total, we see overlapping failures and choices. A marriage that became toxic, a court that interpreted evidence one way, a man who sought to protect himself by sleeping elsewhere, a woman who began an affair and then made a catastrophic decision to remove her husband permanently. We see a community that mourned and a family permanently altered. The facts we've reviewed here are harrowing, not because they are sensational, but because they are human. In the end, Matthew Johnson was a father, a soldier, a colleague, and his life was ended by someone who had once shared a home with him. Jennifer Gladhill is now a convicted murderer, her motives and psychology debated and dissected in courtrooms and in coffee shops. The children will carry the consequences of these actions for decades. This case forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about danger, judgment, and responsibility. What should courts believe? When should friends and family intervene more forcefully? And how can social systems better detect and prevent escalation in relationships? There are no easy answers. But the story of Jennifer Gladhill and Matthew Johnson is a reminder of the fragility of domestic life and of how quickly private disputes can become matters of life and death. If this case leaves you with questions, or if you or someone you know is in an abusive or dangerous relationship, contact local authorities or domestic violence hotlines in your area. Help exists, and reaching out can change an outcome. Thank you for listening. If you found this breakdown informative, subscribe for more investigative true crime narratives. I'm Alex. See you next time.